What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to continue working on our settings menu. So specifically today I'm going to allow us to navigate the menu with keyboards or controllers, and specifically on top of that, we're going to be going over how we can actually modify this menu to make us be able to go left and right, and then switch rows as well. It's actually going to be quite different from our character select, stage select, and all of our other menus. So we're going to use the same topics, we're going to keep the same things that we have worked on to this point, all the the progress we made on our input system for menus, and we're going to expand upon that yet again. You will be able to follow this and then update your character select screen as well if you'd like, and your stage select if you'd like to take some of these things I'm going to show you and make your other menus a little bit simpler and easier to edit. But it's up to you. Right now I haven't gone back and changed any of my other menus. I just like to, as I learn new things or as I think of new ways to do things, show them off in the series. So long story short, we will be able to fully navigate this menu. We can technically navigate through the sliders as well, but they don't do anything at the moment. I don't have assets for them. So you can see that it basically looks like nothing is selected when I'm on the sliders. We will cover that in another episode. We will probably cover that in a specific episode for sliders in this series, because there is quite a bit that you can actually do with them, and we have not explored them yet in this series. Okay, and the other thing that we will need to do is actually being able to select options, save them out, and then load in those selections. So what I mean by this is when the settings menu is opened, we should actually not have everything blank, but rather if our round time was set to 90 seconds, it should be, highlighted or otherwise shown that this is the selected value. And the number of rounds can have a different value, such as 5. All players on one device keyboard mode could have enabled or disabled. These are not, it's not just one selection like our other menus where it's one character, one skin, one stage. It's all different. So that's something else we have to cover, but I actually want to go over that as well in a separate episode, because this navigation alone is going to take up quite a bit, and I don't want to bloat the content. So this is going to cover the navigation specifically today, and being able to do things like go back to the main menu and re-enter the settings menu just like that. So this will be a fully functional menu in terms of navigating through it with the keyboard and controller if you decide to do that, but we won't be able to actually change these settings yet, and we won't be able to save out these values so that they load in when we come into the settings next time. That is for other episodes down the road. We can go ahead and get started today with all that out of the way. So before we do, if you'd like to get caught up in the series, we're on episode 129 of the fighting game tutorial series, which is pretty far along. As you can tell, we still have plenty of work to do, but you can check out this playlist in the top right corner right here if you'd like to see everything we've done, how we've gotten to this point, and also some of the plans for the future. Otherwise, I'll direct you to this episode right here in the top right corner, and this is the first episode of our settings menu, and that is how we set up this menu initially, able to access it from the main menu, and a few additional things. So I definitely recommend watching that before this episode if you haven't already, because we are going to be using that logic today. Alright, and with that out of the way, it's finally time to get started. So first things first, let's go back into our settings menu or settings screen widget that we made in the previous settings episode. So I have this settings screen, and literally the only logic we had in it was on press back button and remove from parent. That's all we had. So if we press the back button, we would return. Otherwise, the rest of it was just setting up the screen. But we've already done that. We're not changing anything with the visuals today. So this is all about the blueprint graph. So we don't need the code today. Instead, we're going to be working in the settings screen, and we're going to do a few additional things on the main menu screen widget as well. Now, as always, there's not a perfect way to do menu flow, menu navigation, menu controls, because player controllers are a very viable reason or method to navigate through menus. However, they're not really, it's not any more viable than a custom input system like we set up. So for the sake of consistency, I'm going to mainly be using the same listen for input action logic that we have, since it works for controllers and keyboard, and it even works for our keyboard mode. So if multiple players want to play on the same mode, they have the ability to control the menu. So I'm not going to be modifying that logic. We're going to be really copying a lot of it, or at least copying the concepts of it. So in my event construct, which I actually deleted in the previous episode because I didn't need it, so you can find it by typing event construct. What I have is I have a bunch of listen for input actions. If you're familiar with our other menus, you probably know what's going on here. Basically, I take input actions that we've set up in our project settings under input, and I have these menu input actions. These could also be just your standard like left, right for the player. I just separated them in case people want to modify their controls further. You can separate menu controls from gameplay controls. Not at all required, but beside the point for now. Basically, I have these input actions that are bound to buttons on a keyboard or buttons on a gamepad. We listen for them in the widget, and then if that input is pressed, we call a function, or really we call an event, which calls a function, which then uses custom navigation to navigate through the settings menu. And so we're going to do this for all of our controls that we can do. This does vary by menu, and you've seen this if you followed my other menu episodes. So in this case, we can go up and down, left and right. We can confirm things, such as we could technically confirm like the round time, number of rounds, and we can even confirm on the back button to go back. We also have just the back button, which is my backspace, which allows me to return from the menu. And we need to set all those up today. So, simply enough, I went ahead and made listen for input action nodes. And feel free to copy these from things like the main menu screen if you have followed the other menu tutorials. So I have listen for input action with the name of the input actions that I'm checking for. I'm going to look for left and right, up and down, confirm, and return, or basically back. Now, this settings menu specifically is a one-player settings menu. It is very possible to have two settings menus, one for each player, or two menus for controller configuration or something like that. That can also be a separate menu. However, I'm going to separate that from the standard settings menu. So controller logic will be different. That way the controls can be figured on a player basis. But for this settings menu, I only really see player one being involved. In a networked game, of course, each player will have their own settings menu that they can access. But that won't factor into the keyboard mode hack logic that we're skipping today because of the reasons I mentioned before. So we're only going to worry about player one. Okay, so that's why I have P1 here. But you can definitely feel free to include player two on this menu if you'd like. Good episode to watch if you're interested in that is either the character select menu logic or the stage select menu logic, because that supports our custom navigation for player one and player two on the same menu. Alright, once we have our listen for input action set up, it has this node on the bottom here called callback. And what it will do is, if this input action has been found to be pressed, in this case, then it will actually go and call this event right here. P1 menu left, P1 menu right, P1 menu up, P1 menu down. All these are just custom events that I've made. Add custom event, and I type the name I want. So I could say go left. And this means I want to go left. There's no logic here. This is a custom event. The logic comes from the functions we're going to write. So these events are just here to capture if there is an input, fire this event, and what does this event do? It calls a function that we've set up. I also have them for confirm and the back button. So let's go ahead and make our functions. We can start with one at a time. We're going to start with the move selection function. Now, I recommend just making a new function here and going into it. You could technically copy the move selection from another thing, such as the main menu. It's somewhat similar, but they are pretty different. Okay. So in this move selection, we have additional options and additional things we have to take into consideration. For example, the main menu screen, its logic is we only have buttons up and down. We can't even go left or right. In this case, we can go up and down and left or right, And there's not only one or two options, like left or right. We can go row 2, column 3, row 3, column 4. We have a bunch. We basically have a grid of options, and they don't all have the same uniform amount of options. So we have to keep track of not only the row we're on, but the column that we're on. So this move selection is a little bit different. If we look at our logic here, let's move everything over here where we can see it. So in this move selection function, we made it. I have 3 parameters that I've added to the input parameter list. I have the direction, which is an integer, is horizontal movement, which is a Boolean, and play sound effects, which is a Boolean. So the direction is basically going to be 1 or -1 to indicate if we're moving left or right. This will also count for going up or down. The direction can be 1 or -1 for either of those values, but we do need to know if it's left or right or up or down, because what values we change and look for are different. If we're going up and down, we have to see what row we're on. If we're going left and right, we have to see what column we're on. So a good way to do this is to have this Boolean is horizontal movement. So basically, is the direction that the player pressed a horizontal movement button, or are we moving left or right as opposed to up and down? If we're moving left and right, we need to worry about columns. So again, left and right would be changing between these buttons, okay? Up and down is changing between round time and number of rounds. So if it is horizontal movement, we know we're moving left and right, in which case we're going to do all this logic here. So let's talk about this for a second. We have current selection in row. This is really the current column, but I was careful about the name here to call it current selection in row because the current column can be forced to different values depending on what thing you're on. So if there's not really a column on the music volume or sound effect volume, there's just a slider, well, you don't really have multiple columns here. The same goes for if you're on a row that has 5, such as number of rounds, and you go down, you only have 2 columns you can be on. So you can't really keep your current column of 5 and put it here. If you do, you're going to be like over here and nowhere, and you won't be able to get back. So just note, current selection row is like current column, but it's specific to non-uniform widgets. Since these buttons have, we have multiple options that are not the same amount of options for all of our settings, current selection in row is what I went with. Okay. What we have to do is make sure that the left and right movement that we do is within a valid range of movement, valid range of navigation. We're going to need a few integers here just to keep track of some of the data of where we are and what we've selected. So I would go ahead and make these now. You can make 2 variables. So I've made a current row and a current selection in row. They're both integers, and they both default to 0. Okay, and so with all that said, what we need to do is if we take our current selection in row, this starts at 0, and we add the direction to it, which is, remember, is -1 or 1, and -1 is left, 1 is right. There's 2 things we need to check to make sure that we are within a valid range of navigation. First of all, we need to make sure we haven't gone too far to the left, and next we have to make sure we haven't gone too far to the right. So we're going to assume our first index is index 0, and so anything under 0 is going to be invalid. That means you're too far to the left. We're also going to assume that anything too far to the right is if you've gone past your maximum amount of selections for that row. Again, in this case, in the keyboard mode case, if this is index 0, this is index 1, and I'm on index 4, well, guess what? I've gone way too far. I'm too far to the right. There's no button there. If I'm on index -1, well, I'm too far to the left. There's no button there. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we fall within that range. So current selection in row plus direction. It's either -1 or 1. We're going to take the result that comes from the integer plus integer node here, okay? And we're going to check if it's greater than -1. This is making sure that we are not too far to the left. But there's another condition here, remember? We have to make sure that we are not too far to the right. How are we going to know that? So, one of the ways we can tell and see if we are within the given range is to know how many selections there are for each row. So for music volume, sound effect volume, there's 1 selection. For round time, number of rounds, there are 5 selections. For all players in one device keyboard mode, there are 2 selections. What we can do is actually make an array of integers. We use the index as the row, and then the number, the value we put in, as the number of selections. So the way you do this is to add another variable. I called it max selections in each row right here. And I've made it an integer array. Normally it'll be the single variable, but if you click the little pill here, you'll see that it is 9 squares. You can select that to get an array. Once you've selected that, you can then fill out the default values. Make sure you compile and save first. Then you can add array elements by clicking the little plus sign. So you see we have 6 array elements because I have essentially 6 rows. I have music volume, sound effect volume, round time, number of rounds, keyboard mode, and I'm actually counting the back button as another selection. Because I can navigate to it, press the confirm button, and actually it will take me back. We set that up for this menu. Okay, so what I've done is I've literally looked at it and determined how many columns I had in each row. For music volume, I had 1 column, which was the music slider. For the sound effect volume, I had 1 column. That was the slider. For the, I believe it's number of rounds. No, for the round time row. For the round time row, I had 5 columns. 30, 60, 90, 99, and infinite. For the number of rounds row, I have 5 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. For the keyboard mode row, I have 2 columns, enabled and disabled. And for the final row, which is the back button, I have 1 column, which is the back button. Simple enough. So I've set up a makeshift array here. I've forced this array. And now I know, depending on the row that we're at, we have this many columns we can go through. So our current row variable that we set up earlier, we can use that to determine the row we're on, and the output that we get from the column is how many spaces we can move over. Okay? It might be a little bit weird to think about. But basically, this tells us our rows and columns. Using our current row, we can determine how many columns we are, and using the current selection in row, plus the direction, we can determine if we are too far to the right, too far to the left, or in the middle. So, if we get our max selections in each row, then we call get, and we want to copy. Copies are faster on smaller variables and not complex objects, so copies are better for integers here. That's the reason we want to do it, better for performance. And on this get, for the index that we're accessing, that's the row. So we want to use our current row and pass it in here. This returns the column. Okay? So all we have to do is check and see, make sure that the current selection in row plus the direction is less than the column we get from here. So literally take the result of this addition, integer less than integer, and pass in the get return node into the bottom there. Now both are too far to the left and too far to the right checks return a Boolean result. We want to add them both to an AND Boolean node here. If either one of these cases fails and we're too far to the left or too far to the right, it's going to return false. So we're going to do a branch off of this and only if it returns true do we want to set the column that we're on to the result of current selection in row plus the direction. If it's false, you could default it to a different value if you'd like. I tend to just leave it alone. You could allow it to wrap. You could start it back at the first section. It's up to you. That menu logic is entirely up to you. Okay. Now, the good thing is, while this is different, this is pretty much the same logic maybe even a little bit simpler. So if is horizontal movement is false, this means this is an up or down movement with our input. So essentially we're moving between, music volume to sound effect volume, or round time to number of rounds. We're not moving between the elements within these. We're basically changing the category that we're on. So, like I said, if is horizontal movement is false, we come down here, and then this is the logic. We need to make sure we're not too high, and we need to make sure we're not too low. To do that, we can just check our current row plus the direction. So just like we were checking the current column plus the direction, we're going to grab our current row, say plus the direction. Make sure that it is greater than -1. Again, assuming the top row, our music volume, is 0, an index of -1 would be above it, so we don't want to be able to access that. We also don't want to be able to go too low. So remember I said the max selections in each row? Each index was a row. Well, if we have index 0 to index 5, then we have 6 rows total. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we want to make sure we don't go below that value. Okay, we don't want to go below the back button. Okay, so I just grab the max selections in each row, get the length of it, and then I make sure that the current row plus the direction returns a value less than the length. Just like that. Okay, and as with above, they both return booleans, so we put them into an AND boolean. We put that AND result into a branch, and only if it's true that we're on a valid up or down value for menu navigation do we want to set the current row to be equal to the current row plus the direction. You can see it reroutes to here, which sets the current row again. I also went ahead and reset the column when we changed rows. You don't have to do this. You could check and see if the previous column and the current column have the same number of columns. And if they do, you could go ahead and keep your position. So for example, if I'm on 99 and I press down, since they both have 5 columns, you could just automatically put the player's menu navigation on the 4 button here. If you want to get fancy, you could definitely do that. That is up to you if you'd like to do logic like that. For me, I'm fine with resetting it to the first value for now, but we can always upgrade that later. So I just go ahead and reset it back to 0 no matter what, because I know 0 will always be a valid index for every row. Now, that's the hard stuff. That's the movement logic. The rest of it is going to be stuff you've pretty much seen before, but I'm just going to do a little bit differently and, in fact, a little bit more efficiently. So it'll probably be even easier than you've seen before. Now, regardless if it is a horizontal movement or not, they both end up going into these nodes. All these nodes are shared. So I make a new function now, and I call it determine button to focus. So I made a new function, called it determine button to focus. Let me move these tabs back to normal again. That way I can show the order here. And so what we need to do is we need to determine what button we're on, so we know what object on the HUD, on the menu really, that we need to focus, that we need to visually indicate to the player that they are on that input. So before, what we were doing is we were looking and seeing, oh, we're on this index. We know this selection, this index on the button is this selection. So for example, on our character select screen, these are numbered as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I knew, oh, we're on this button, then we can go ahead and select that value. Well, we can't really do that here. I mean, we could. We definitely could. We could assign all these values. However, we want to think ahead a little bit and make it a little bit easier in case we want to add more options down the line. So what I actually prefer doing is to do a switch on the current row and a switch on the current column, and then assign the button that we're currently on after the move, and we can do logic with it after, as opposed to doing a lot of repetitive logic. So before, in our move selection border, this is what we were doing. Now this is actually fine, but you see how many times we had to repeat logic over and over again for each individual button? We're basically getting rid of that with this method. Okay, so let me show you. Here's our determine button to focus. I grab our current row, and I perform a switch statement on it. Switch on int. Then I know our maximum amount of rows. I can either determine it by looking at these values here, or I can determine it just by looking and knowing how many rows I had, the same way I set up this array in the first place. So I know that I have 6 rows, indexes 0 through 5. So I add pins until I have all those values, and the default is important here, just in case we screw up any of our logic or we add other rows in the future, the default case will catch it, and we'll know what to do with it from there. So basically, each row can go to another switch statement where we check the column, and we'll know exactly what button or input we're on. Again, I haven't set up the sliders, so it's kind of a bad example to start with these, but I think it will still get the point across. Row 0 and row 1 are the music slider and the sound effects slider. They only have one row, which is index 0. So basically, I'm going to perform a switch statement on our current selection and row variable and leave it alone with the one index that it has. Just like that. Then I'll do my logic with the slider, the music slider, and the sound effects slider volume. But since we're not worried about those yet, we're going to skip them, and I've just left them alone. Instead, let's focus on the actual buttons so we know exactly what it is that we are going to be focusing, since we can already focus buttons in our current logic. Basically, what I want to do is determine what column you're on, what button that correlates to, and then return that to the previous function. So move selection, we call this function, and it returns the current button. And it's a button object reference. So in our determine button to focus, I've added an output parameter, not an input parameter, and I've made it a button object reference. It's important to note, since this is a button object reference, these sliders won't work with this period. So really what we should do is make this something as simple like a widget. But if you were to do that, it would screw up a few things that we're doing in this episode. So just note, I'm well aware of this, and we're going to adjust this to just make it a plain widget so we can pass in sliders, buttons, or other input types such as drop downs, and that's probably pretty much it. But we can support more than just buttons. However, we only support buttons right now. Currently in the series, we haven't done anything else on any of our widgets, so I might as well show you with the button, and then when we go over sliders, we can upgrade it. It'll be a very quick and easy upgrade, not to worry. So I've made a button type, and I've called it the current button. Now all I have to do is, for the rows that have buttons, such as row 2, 0, 1, 2, you see this is the round time row. So I have 5 columns. You know what that means by now? The switch on the current selection row is going to have a switch statement with 5 values, 0 through 4, and then the default. We're going to link up the buttons with the corresponding column number. So index 0 on the switch is round time 1 button. 1 on the switch is round time 2 button. 2 on the switch is round time 3. 3 on the switch is round time 4. And 4 on the switch is round time 5. The defaults, I always just make them go up to the 0 spot, but that's up to you. If you have a preference, if you want to default to the middle or even to the end, you could as well. And really, all you have to do here is very simple. You just have to make sure that these are checked as variables. We already set that up in the previous episode. So you should have this list of all your buttons here on the side with your other variables. And you just drag them in. So if I'm on the next row, I know that that is the number of rounds row. So what I'm going to do is grab the number of columns that are there. There's 5 buttons, which is 0 through 4. And then I just pass in the button and say return node for all of these. It's literally that simple. So round time button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number of rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I always return it afterward. To get the return node, if you don't know, is just type in return. And there's an add return node. It will automatically set up this node with the ability to plug in something that is in the output parameter section here. Since we've already set up current button, we can plug in any of our buttons. And then what I did is I just copied it, pasted it, and replaced the button. Okay, that's that simple. So you're going to do the same process for all of the settings in your settings menu. You see this is my keyboard mode. I only have 2 settings, enabled and disabled. And then in my bottom one, it's just the back button. No matter what, you're going to have a value that is returned here, a button that's returned here. What's going to happen is it's going to go back and move selection. This is going to hold the button that the selection is currently on. That is excellent, because what that means is we can now simply apply the new image on that button to show that we are on it. Okay, so this blue tint is coming from this function. This means that we have, see where it's following my input as I'm pressing it. All right, so turn button to focus finds the button that we're on. Then I have another function called update button visuals, which actually changes the image of the button. That way it shows where the user actually is. That's when the button turned blue. So go ahead and make a new function yet again. I called it update button visuals with an input parameter of button reference. And I just passed the current button in from determine button to focus. I call it immediately after that in the move selection function. Now, update button visuals is very simple. Instead of copying this logic a bunch of times and filling it out, we're only going to do it one time. Okay, I have my button reference here. I check for validity first by checking is valid with the question mark. Only if it's valid do I do this. This is just a safety net in case I am working on a widget and not all the buttons were included, or I somehow access a button that is not able to take this style because it's null pointer or it's pending destruction. Then we want to make sure that we skip it. We don't want to set the style. This is also important for our sliders, since they aren't a real button reference. Again, they're sliders, not buttons. They will fail here. So it's got a few purposes. But if we check if it's valid, that means that this button exists, and we can then set the style to the style that we want. It's quite simple, really. We have a button style like this normally, and we set up the normal to be button bar 1, whatever. That's the style that I chose. That's my standard default image for a button. Then I happen to have one that is the blue button. And if I look here, it's this guy right here, that light blue. That's the player 1 hover of any of our default buttons. So for that guy, you can drag off the button reference, say set style. You want the blue one here. Technically, either of them work and they're fine. I prefer this one so that I can just split the widget style here and get exactly what I want. So I split the style, and then I want to split the widget style normal as well. And there you go. See, I have the ability to set the specific values here. So I'm going to select my button hover. And I like to do box as the style. If you're following the series, you'll know why I picked box for mine, just because it looked good and it matched the size that I actually wanted to have. But that's up to you. However you want to make your game look is completely up to you, so I won't tell you one way or another. That's how I have it. After that, I call one final function here, which is to clear the previous selections that we had. It's called clear past selections. This is used to unhighlight. So if we didn't call this, all right, we would come in here and we could go over all of our options, but they stay highlighted. And then once you fill them out, you can never tell which one you're on again. So we do need to clear our buttons once we're off of them. So every time we move, I call clear past selections to clear whatever one we're not on. So go ahead and call it in this function. So make this function, clear past selections, and call it immediately after setting the style of this one. Okay. Now let's go to clear past selections, and I'll show you what it looks like. This was also a pain before. If you remember this one was, let's say we go to our main menu, okay? Let me show you what it looked like in here. what we did is we checked to see if the selection was equal to every index. And if it was, we called an event, which we made in the event graph. And it was literally the same logic every time, but with a different button involved. Now, this can actually be useful if you want to do different effects for every button, which some games do. Some games have different effects for each button, like main menu, story, arcade, versus. They might have different effects, different styles that have to be done to them. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing to do. However, in the settings menu, I wanted them all to be exactly the same. So instead of doing that logic, which is ugly for that case, we can actually do something a lot simpler. Okay? So what I do is I grab all my buttons. They're all here. They're all visible. I know which ones they are because I worked on the widget, but even if you didn't, you just grab all your buttons. Anything that's a button on here that you want to be able to navigate to and that you were able to change the focus to and change the color of. So like when I changed it to my light blue, when I go off of that button, it should revert back to the default style. So I've actually grabbed every button that I had. Just literally like get, and I grab all of them. Okay, and I just have them all sitting here. Then I can do something crazy called make array. And it will make an array of whatever type I give it. This is a wild card, so it'll take anything. So when I put in a button, this becomes a button array that's going to return. Then I can add as many pins as I want, and I can keep adding these elements into. I had 12, so I added every single button into this array. Then I looped through it. Okay, I just do for each loop. And so this for each loop, all we have to do is make sure that we're not on the selection. We don't want to clear the selection we're currently on. We want to clear the rest of them. So we drag off the for each loop. We say not equal to. It'll automatically know this is a button object. So not equal to, it's expecting another button. Luckily, we pass in a button reference here. So yet again, like we did for our other functions, in ClearPath selections, I have an input parameter called button reference that is a button object reference type. I pass that in from the button reference that comes from update button visuals. So I compare the button reference that comes in to the for each element. That's what I'm doing right here. If it's not equal to it, that means we want to reset the style because that means we are not currently on that button. So it should go back to the default inactive button. So if we branch and we reach true, then I reset it to my standard button, which is button var 1, button variation 1. Okay? Otherwise, I don't do anything. I leave it alone. Now, that will get you full navigation capabilities. There's a few other things we should do in the event graph regarding the backing out of the menu, and there's two things I want to update in the main menu to get rid of bugs that could come up from this new menu as well. Okay? Now that we have all that set up, let's go back to our event graph and look at the listen for input actions. Remember, I explained these and I explained the custom events with them. Now we have to call our functions so that we map out what happens when we press these inputs. So if I press left, I want to call move selection. And the values I'm going to give it are -1 because we're moving to the left. That's a negative value. It is horizontal movement. And I have this play sound effects. I skipped over the play sound effects thing. Now I'll go ahead and cover it since we're here. So move selection also has this play sound effects boolean, which I did talk about that. But after update button visuals, I then check that boolean and determine if we should play a sound effect or not. This is because when we're moving around in our settings menu, a lot of times you will hear sound effects in games. And so we should have the ability to play sound effects, but we don't always want to. There's a few reasons when we don't, such as if we're manually moving to a specific value and it wasn't determined by the player, such as at the start of the menu when we call move selection. We don't want to play the sound effect for that. And so that's just a boolean to ignore sounds that we don't want to hear. Basically, it goes into a branch, and if the branch is true that we do want to play the sound effect, then we play the sound effect. It's literally that simple. So I go into my event graph, and I have that checked for all of our manual movements here. For move right, I have a direction of 1 because it's positive. We're moving to the right. It is still horizontal movement. It's not up and down. And play sound effects. For up, I have -1. Usually in programming, the top left corner is the origin. So moving up is actually negative. So direction of -1 is negative. It is not horizontal movement. It is vertical, so that is unchecked. And we do play sound effects. For menu down, I have a +1 because down is positive. It is not horizontal movement, and we play sound effects. For P1 menu confirm, I'm calling the confirm selection function. We actually haven't covered this yet. This will be just something nice that we do at the end. So you can go ahead and make this confirm selection function now if you want. Just make a new function, call it confirm selection. It doesn't take in any parameters. Okay, and then we can go into the confirm selection, and here's what I've decided to do. Is I call determine button to focus, which we made earlier, remember, because that determines what button we're on. If we're on the back button, then I trigger the P1 back event. In the event graph, P1 back is the return button. So we can trigger this event either by pressing the back button, by confirming the back button with our custom navigation, or by clicking it with the mouse. All three of those will lead us to this logic here. We'll get into that in a second. But let's go back to the confirm selection. So we call determine button to focus. We do equal off the button, and we can check for a specific button, such as the back button. Then, if they are equal, if it's true, we call P1 back. Regardless if it's true or not, we should play the sound effect if we want to play the sound effect. That's important. Just like we did with the move selection, we should actually have a boolean in here called play sound effects. And that should be used to determine if we want to play this. For example, if we're selecting something that we already are on, we may not want to play it. I'm not going to cover that today because there's going to be a lot of updates to the confirm selection on this menu, specifically regarding all the changes we're going to make depending on the choices that we pick in this menu. In fact, all these buttons are unique. Unlike character select where we're just assigning one variable, all these things are changing different values. So we're going to become very friendly with this confirm selection function and modify a lot about it. So I'm going to leave it just like this for now. All right. You can see at the end of the event graph, as I said, I'm calling move selection. Just so you know, now that we've gone over a little bit more, you can see the direction is 0. I'm not moving it at all. I'm just calling this so that I can get us set up in the correct spot. It's not required that you actually do this. I do this out of habit to say, yep, we're not moving it. It's not horizontal movement and we shouldn't play sound effects. But really, it functions the same without it. I just want to show you this. So to avoid confusion, you can just get rid of it. We don't need that move selection. Okay. Now we need to go over our back logic. So no matter how we get to back, we do have multiple ways, but we want to go back to the main menu at this point. What we have to do at this phase is we have to determine what menu is up, if we should listen to input or stop listening to input, and then either pop up a menu or hide it. So before we cover this, let's go to the main menu screen. In the main menu, we have these input actions that we set up, just like our other custom navigation. Okay. Not only that, but we can move selection just like normal. We can move selection borders like I was showing you earlier. And we have confirm selection. This is where we were actually spawning the settings screen. If we adjust just a few small things, we can make this menu a lot better. So one thing we don't want is when the settings menu is open, we don't want things on the main menu to still be happening. For example, we have this quick game pop up. When we're in here, we don't want to be able to move up and down with our up and down inputs while we're on this little pop-up window. Technically, before, we could. So I went ahead and fixed that, and then I also fixed it for the settings menu. So we had this boolean is quit game up, and that stopped us from popping up multiple of this menu at the same time, and it stopped us from confirming and going into other menus. But it didn't stop us from moving around. So specifically in the move selection function in the main menu, move selection, we had is quit game up, and we had a branch, and only if this was false were we allowed to move around. This stopped us from moving on that moving on the main menu when the quit game pop-up was up, and that's good. We want that. But we also want to do that if the settings menu is open. So I went ahead and made a new boolean, called it is settings menu open. Default's to false because it's not open by default. Then in move selection on the main menu screen, I went ahead and added that as an OR to the is quit game up. So same boolean, same branch, but we want to make sure that we also check against this boolean and an OR. The result of that OR will go into the branch. So if either of these menus are up, we don't want to be able to move on the main menu. Simple enough. One thing we never did was actually implement this behavior on the confirm selection. So you could actually confirm things when the quit game option was up. It didn't really matter for that case since you can't move around, but it will matter for the settings menu, because if we try and close the settings menu with the manual confirm button, so say we navigate to the back button and hit confirm, that's actually going to close the menu, and then we're going to get back to the main menu screen, and it's going to call confirm selection here since it's the same button, which is going to pop up the settings menu again. So at the front of confirm selection, before we play sound effects like we were here, what we should do is add that same set of logic that we just had in move selection, and only if it's false, go into the confirm selection logic. That'll fix up a ton of bugs that we can have with multiple menus popping up and spawning when we don't want them to, and losing references to other menus. There's another thing we want to do that is just like how we set up the exit game or quit pop-up. So let me show you how this works. So before, we were creating this widget and we were adding it to the viewport. That's still all we're doing. Nothing's changing there. But you can see we have additional nodes now too. In the settings screen, I've added one final variable, add variable, and I made it the main menu screen widget. Now this is not required. You just need it to be a widget type. The only reason it's main menu screen for now is because this is the only place we can reach it. In the future, we will be able to reach the settings menu from the pause menu. So we'll want to make sure we support more than the main menu screen for this. But I've made this variable. I've made the main menu screen object reference. And now, once we spawn the settings menu, I actually go ahead and set that value. So you can drag off the return and type set. I called it the creator widget reference, by the way. That's the main menu screen object reference. And so I drag off of it and I set creator widget reference. Then, that's the target, but we need to set something to it. We're going to set it to self, just like we did below. This is so we can actually set this is settings menu open, and also set it to be shut. So once the settings menu is closed, we want to reset this back to false, but we need a reference to the widget to tell it that, yeah, it's false. That menu is gone. You can resume control on the standard main menu logic. Okay. So basically set the widget reference and you're good for saying, yep, this is essentially the owner of this widget. And for our custom navigation purposes, we will be able to now back out of the settings menu. On top of it, what we should do is set the is settings menu open to be true. That way, the main menu knows this menu is open and we can't navigate or confirm while it is. And there's one final thing that we're going to want to do. So, there's a fancy way we can do this, where we can actually stop listening to certain inputs if it's going to cause a bug with overlap. So sometimes menu input isn't consumed. It's up to you how you set up these. You can call consume here. You can stop listening for an input action. You can block it out with booleans. There's a lot of ways to do this. So I'm just showing you a method we've never done before, just so you can learn it, and if you like it, feel free to use it. Basically, once the settings menu is open, I want to stop listening for the menu confirm P1 input action on the main menu. This will prevent any bugs from coming up when we press the confirm key. No matter what we've been doing in the settings menu, the main menu won't react to it. All you do is call stop listening for input action. Then you type in the action name, which is menu confirm P1. That's my start key or my continue key. We're just stopping listening to this, so we're not really doing anything with it. We're just saying don't listen for that anymore. That basically invalidates this right here, this initial one that gets set on the main menu. But you can see I've done something else here. I've now made a new event that can trigger the listen for input action again. Now I did this a little crazy the way I set it up, because what I wanted was to only allow this one to be resumed at the time being. So let me explain what this means, and then you can have fun with it if you decide you want to address this differently. So I've made a new event, add custom event, and I've called it resume listening for confirm. So basically, once we stop listening for it, it will never pick up the confirm button on the main menu again unless we enable listening for it again. So once I come out of the settings menu, if I don't have this enabled, right now we'll be able to go like this. I can come out of my settings menu, but then I can never go into anything else no matter how many times I hit confirm. So I have to listen to it again at some point. But I didn't want to do everything that is on event construct again. So I set up this custom event, and I basically copied this node and pasted it. That way, if this event gets called, we just listen for this one input action. The callback can still go to the same event that it did on event construct, because callbacks can come from multiple places. So this delegate can go to multiple things. So all these different listens can all trigger this one event. So even if this one's invalidated, if we call this event, we will then trigger this guy, listen for input action, which is also tied to this callback. So we can then get our menu confirm logic back. If we have that plugged in, I can go to settings, whatever, set my things, go back here, and then I can still go into the versus mode after and do all my logic as normal. Okay. So the main thing we have to do is reset our is settings menu open when we go to close it and call this event. If we go back to the settings menu one final time, we can now check our creator widget reference, make sure it's valid. If it's not valid, we'll want to do other logic in the future. So I go ahead and get it and convert it to a validated get. Then I set is settings menu open to false. Just like this. And then I call that new event resume listening for confirm. Okay, that's what I did right here. Resume listening for confirm. So once we call this, we say, yep, settings menu is closed. And then we also add that listening for that input back into the logic. So we can press start and confirm again and all that good stuff. We still want to remove it from the parent after this because at this point the settings menu is done. We wrapped up everything we've needed there. With all that said, we finally completed the settings menu navigation. So we have pretty much full control over our settings menu and returning to our main menu, all that logic. Thank you guys for sticking with me. This was a long one. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. That's more for myself and the channel than anything else. It's completely free. I'd be really grateful. I also want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys so much for everything. I really appreciate you guys looking forward to this video week after week and just throwing me all the support you can. I'm really grateful for it, and I love this community. Speaking of communities, if you ran into trouble during this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and I'd be happy to help you out. It's completely free. Anyway, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.